And yet, to this day, I can distinctly recall a comment my professor made at the beginning of the course, and it was a statement that no student ever wants to hear their professor make. He began the course by saying, "You're not going to like this class very much." And he said, "It's not because I'm a bad professor. It's not because the textbooks I've chosen are boring." He said, "It's because the 20th century is known for the most horrific, appalling examples of man's inhumanity to man." And indeed, his words were very true. If we look back at the 20th century, we see numerous examples of atrocities being inflicted upon innocent human beings. There's the Rwandan genocide in 1994, which resulted in approximately 800,000 to 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus being killed over approximately 3 months. There's the Bosnian genocide, where from 1992 to 1995, approximately 200,000 people were killed. There is the Cambodian genocide, where under the the regime of Pol Pot, approximately 2 million people were killed. Then there is the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews and 5 million others were killed. And I could go on, but the point certainly is made that my professor was correct in pointing out that what makes the 20th century so well known is the countless examples of bloodshed and atrocities that were inflicted upon innocent human beings. And as we look back at these injustices in history, what we see time and again is that when the value of a human being is placed not on that human being's existence, but instead is placed on the associations, the appearances, or the abilities of certain human beings, inevitably the weak and vulnerable are in some way harmed by the more powerful and influential. So when the value of an individual is placed on the associations they have, their appearances, or their abilities, inevitably what happens is that the weak and the vulnerable in some way are harmed by the more powerful and influential. And I would propose that idea that certain individuals are dehumanized based on their associations, appearances, or abilities, resulting in their basic right to life being taken from them by those who are more strong and powerful, it's that which has made its way into the abortion debate. That I would argue what's happening there is that the unborn are denied their value. They're perceived to be inferior to those who are more powerful and influential, and then you have another atrocity going on. In this case, I would argue it would be abortion. Now, I recognize some people would argue that abortion isn't about taking away someone's right to life, but rather it's about giving someone the right to choose. That abortion is about a woman having freedom. That abortion is about a woman having equality with men. Far from an abortion being an atrocity, it is a good thing. So before I make my case this afternoon for how abortion is an echo of the Holocaust, what I first need to do is make the case for how the unborn are human beings, or persons do the same. And then make the case for how abortion actually kills those human beings. And only once I make that case do I have enough information to be able to adequately make a case for how abortion is echoes of the Holocaust. I realize, however, some people would find my parallel of abortion and historical atrocities, such as the Holocaust, to be appalling, because perhaps they would consider what I'm comparing, the killing of the unborn to the killing of, say, Jews, to be comparing apples and oranges. Some people would argue that the unborn aren't people, that instead they are potential persons, they're tissue, some people might even say parasites, and so I can't compare a woman's right to choose with the mass extermination of innocent, valuable human beings, as was the case with the Holocaust. And so some people would argue that my comparison of abortion to the Holocaust is as offensive as this. What PETA does, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, they compare, in this case, the killing of cows to the killing of Jews. There's also this picture in their campaign, the killing of chickens to the killing of Jews. And most people, myself included, find this comparison appalling. They find it insensitive. They find it shocking. And the reason the average person would find this parallel and Jews are. So that's what makes this comparison invalid. And so therefore, I realize that some, particularly those who support abortion, who look at what my organization claims is that abortion is parallel to the Holocaust, would find what I'm saying as offensive as this, because they perhaps would argue fetuses aren't people, just like chickens aren't people. So just as you can't compare killing chickens to killing Jews, you can't compare aborting fetuses to killing Jews. And so my point is, it all comes down to whether fetuses are people. If PETA is correct that chickens are equal to human beings, then their comparison is valid. Of course, if they're incorrect, then their comparison is invalid. And so the same then is true for my case. If I am wrong about fetuses being human, then my comparison of abortion to the Holocaust is invalid. But if I am correct about fetuses being human, then the comparison is valid. So that therefore brings me then to examining whether the unborn are human beings, and if they are, at what point in pregnancy life begins. So I'd like to begin by each of us considering our own lives. If they were to be drawn out on a timeline, taking the age we're presently at, working backwards to identify when each of us first began, where would that beginning point be? Well, in the timeline of, let's say, a 20-year-old's life, we know that 20 years prior, that person was born. The next thing we know in the timeline of this individual's life is that 9 months prior to that, a process called fertilization occurred, or conception. And there are several things scientifically we know about the process of fertilization. The first is that the DNA you have as a, let's say, a 20-year-old, whether you are male or female, what your hair or eye color are, all of the genetic information which distinguishes you from, let's say, me, that was determined not at 18, not at 2, not at birth, not 2 months before birth, but we know it was determined at fertilization. The next thing we know about fertilization is that the unborn are alive. We know they must be alive because of the scientific principle that says living things come from other living things. Now, someone who's thinking through that may say, well, wait a minute, all that means is that the sperm and the egg which formed the zygote are alive. Are you saying sperm and egg are somehow equal to zygotes, which is the scientific term to refer to the newly conceived being at fertilization? Well, my answer to that would be no, sperm and egg by themselves are not the same as the zygote, and that's why this third point is very important. At fertilization, we have a whole being. Sperm and egg by themselves are much like a foot or a hand in that they're parts of a being. But the zygote is very different. It's not a part, it's a whole. The zygote has everything it needs within itself to move to the next, more mature stage of its development. Finally, in the case of human reproduction, we know the kind of being we have at fertilization must be of the human species. And we know that because of the scientific principle which says living things reproduce after their own kind. So dogs from dogs, cats from cats, and humans from humans. So in terms of when life begins, there's no debate. Even if you look at the embryology textbooks used by medical students, such as Morgan Prassad's embryology, Langman's embryology, all of these books very explicitly state life begins at fertilization. The development of a human being begins at fertilization. So we know scientifically, each of us began our lives when the sperm fertilized the egg. Now, admittedly, there are some differences between the unborn and the born. And in my experience in debating many people on abortion, what happens is those who support abortion will take the differences between the unborn and the born and say, even if the unborn and fertilization are genetically human, they're not persons. And so the concept of human and person get divorced from each other, and a person gets defined by how one appears or what one is able to do. And so because the unborn don't appear a certain way or can't do certain things, some people would argue that they're not persons.